we have a panel discussion now for you with three fantastic people. One of them you've just been hearing from, John Gibson. We also have Neil Reimer, partner at Index Ventures, who, as all of you will know, have done a huge amount to support urban innovation and innovation in cities around the world. And Andrew Collinge from the Greater London Authority, Assistant Director at the GLA. So Neil, Andrew, please take to the stage. Hey, hi. Well, thank you. So let me kick off with you, Andrew. I mean, we've just heard there, London doesn't have top spot. You know, we're sort of leading rankings in all kinds of ways right now. Most tourist numbers, you know, global capital flows, and so on. What do you think we need to be doing on the technology and innovation front? What's on your to-do list?
It's the close but no cigar moment, isn't it, for me? Thank you for that. A bit of tough love and second place. So anyway, what do we need to do? I think this is a matter of coordination and determinism and political priority. And I'm going to start with political priority. I think the whole issue of innovation, data, technology needs to be much more centre stage in a place like City Hall than it currently is. I really respond to the point about a data literate mayor like Bloomberg, and the same goes for Chicago, where you've got Rahm Emanuel. I have a classicist for a mayor, talented as he is, but the sort of priorities and the way that we organise ourselves around those tend to be a bit different. But that's not to say that we are quite so sort of stage left as we used to be, the people who are involved in those sorts of things. So I'd like to see more political emphasis, and I think part of that is down to people like me, whose job it is to prove the value of some of these undertakings. And then there's this issue of coordination. And I notice on there the digital governance and where London sort of tends to fall back. I think we're in the fourth tier in the report there, whereas we're in tier 1 for a lot of the rest of the categories. And that, to me, sort of shouts this issue about the boroughs and how they own a lot of data and deliver a lot of services in this city. And we need to collaborate better with them.
Well, and just to ask a question before everyone in the room does, broadband in London. So we have 2 gigabytes per second in this building, but only because we begged, borrowed, and stole to get it going. It's very rare in this city. It's about 7 times faster, I think, than any other building nearby. What are you guys going to do on connectivity?
A lot of this is down to, I suppose, national policy, but what City Hall does best is, I think, sort of take the argument to central government, and it's a pretty good bully pulpit for that, actually. One of the things that we've done this week, because again it's about making the case, is launch a section on the GLA website, which is where you as citizens, as businesses, as community representatives can go to sort of protest about the lack of provision around broadband and Wi-Fi, so that we can then take those arguments to the market and to central government when we need to.
Fantastic. Neil, you look at companies from around the world and invest in companies in every major city. You know, what examples have you seen of companies that have emerged, you know, really supported by cities? And have you seen examples where, you know, companies maybe you've invested in, maybe you haven't, that are really being impeded by policies and regulation at city level?
Yeah, so I live in Geneva, even though you wouldn't know it because I'm here every week for a couple of days. And that in and of itself kind of tells you something. I have to be here because I can't really do what I do in Geneva. We can talk about Geneva afterwards, but I'm keen to see them on this list. You know, I think just to maybe give a vote in favor of London, I think London has done a remarkable job over the last 10 years, where, you know, during which we've been investing across Europe. It's just incredible. The interface, number one, the interface that they've had with people like us, and being interested in what we do and recognizing that this technology thing is important. And it's not just one of 15 priorities, it's the priority. And this is the future of our economy. And so if I take a company, to answer your question, like Funding Circle, which is a local hero here, but is now growing very fast in the US, started off in London, benefited from all of the infrastructure and talent that is attracted to London from an entrepreneur standpoint, with developers and product people and just lots of young people who are driven and choose to live here. But also had access to number 10, which happens to be in London as well, and was able to early on say, we're going to do this thing. It's a marketplace for small business loans. We think it's a good thing. It will allow people to invest in small businesses, and it will allow small businesses to raise money without having to go through these banks, which are slow and not lending money anyway. Will you just tell us that, so this is not really a city thing, so I'm cheating a bit. But it happened in this city, and it reflects the same kind of policy. And they gave him a clean bill of health and said, we're not going to regulate that. We do think it's a public good. And then ultimately, they ended up even putting money on the platform and supporting it. But I do think that is, they're the same people. They're sitting in the same city. They want the same things. And the business has thrived and entered the US, where it's thriving as well. And it's benefited immensely from that kind of an atmosphere, which recognized that the future of the city does not lie in traditional industries or even traditional financial services. It lies in the new ones.
But there's a set of cities, even ones that were in the sort of top rank of cities in John's list, a city like Paris, say,
Yep.
which hasn't been all that friendly to Uber or Airbnb. The incumbents in those industries have fought back, and you've seen the city administrations there take the side of the incumbents. I mean, how much does that
It's funny.
shape your thinking as you're making investment decisions?
It's funny you say Paris, because one of our exciting companies in Paris is called BlaBlaCar, which is a ride-sharing business for long distances, and it really competes with buses or trains across the country. It's not an Uber-like thing. It's for traveling from one city to the other. And the reason it emerged, and they're also kind of taking over the world, but they emerged in Paris, which I think you can kind of retrofit a backstory to, and it basically goes like this. France is highly centralized. People migrate to the city, they work in Paris, but they go back to their towns and cities on the weekend. And you can either take a bus or take a train, but the problem is they have a lot of strikes. And people hate that. No consumer likes strikes. And so when this thing emerged, actually one of the first weekends they were up, there was a massive SNCF strike. And they just tweeted something like, SNCF is on strike, but we're not. And so that kind of thing drove people to take this kind of thing in their own hands and provide a solution to a problem that's endemic in France.
As you say, you can retrofit different stories onto BlaBlaCar. Another way of, I've heard people talk about BlaBlaCar, this amazing company in France, is that the coach system in France is so heavily regulated that it's basically non-existent. It's very hard to get a coach from one French city to another. So BlaBlaCar, which is ride-sharing between French cities, emerged. SNCF, the French railway, said the chief executive used to say that their biggest competitor was BlaBlaCar. And I think I'm right in saying that SNCF have now successfully lobbied the French government to deregulate the coach market so that SNCF can operate coaches that compete with BlaBlaCar. John, how does Paris end up on your top rank of cities, given that kind of regulatory approach? What is it that sort of caught your eye, besides the wine and the ladies?
I think so Paris does a lot of stuff well, and there's definitely a certain kind of French flavour to the kind of things that they scored really highly on. So, for example, they have the city has built an enormous network of incubators. I think they're about to open the world's largest startup accelerator called Cargo sometime later this year. And so there's definitely a lot of activity going on. But I think the wider question is, how is it that kind of bad performance in one area doesn't undermine good performance in another? And I have to say that one of the lessons coming out of our work is that often it does. The way that we measure things doesn't necessarily capture that particularly well, I have to say. But when you see large gaps on this, on these sort of profiles, it often is very consequential for the city. And so another good example is Barcelona, who also face fairly serious regulatory problems, not of their own doing in their case, but a combination of local courts in Barcelona and the government in Madrid have effectively banned Airbnb and Uber in the city. And so that's something that, again, they're going to have to deal with if they really want to realize their potential. I mean, there's no point in investing money in a startup accelerator and then banning the company that comes out the other side of it.
And just to drill into London again, you talked about the role of a chief technology officer and so on, the importance there of leadership and coordination. What else do you think London should be doing? There'll be a new mayor in come 2016. What would you advise him or her to be doing to ensure that London leaps ahead?
Well, I think I think you picked on one that is, I'm sure, dear to many of our hearts, which is access to high-quality broadband, or ideally fibre. Other cities are doing very well by installing free public Wi-Fi, and that's something that it would be great to see in London. I mean, I think Andrew's exactly right, that London is often held back by the fact that it has 33 different boroughs, whereas New York has 5. And it's just much harder to get a lot of this stuff through. And therefore, I think that the new mayor probably it sort of re-emphasizes the importance of this kind of leadership role, because it's going to be, a lot of it is going to be about championing and coordinating and kind of leading from the front, as opposed to sort of doing things with policy levers you directly own.
Andrew, John talked about government purchasing, which is one of those sort of really arcane and boring things that's massively important. And when we were elected in 2010 in government, 99% of government contracts went to companies with more than 250 employees. So there's a huge bias in the procurement system to big companies, not innovative ones. What kind of things are you doing to use purchasing power at the GLA level and the mayor's level to drive innovation in the city?
I'd have to be honest and say that we could do a lot more. The thing that I would point to that we do try really hard on with regard to small companies is to partner with them and go in pursuit of government grants and European money, and to use London as a test bed. So you sort of build it once in London and then you export it. So I think Fran's here from a company called Mastodon C, which is a sort of small startup dealing in big data. So in that case, my team and Fran went after money from Innovate UK, which we were successful in winning, and we've got £1.5 million worth of funding to now develop a product that, should it be successful, and the innovation works, and we succeed in where we're trying to get to, Fran will have a product that she can then take and sell to other cities around the country.
Fantastic. Neil, you're horizon scanning the whole time and jumping from city to city, looking at great companies. What trends do you see emerging over the next couple of years in this sort of urban innovation space? What is it that excites you?
I think that it doesn't take a ton of imagination to see that the on-demand economy that we've all experienced with Uber is just unstoppable. And it's not that London had a bad cab situation. London cabs work pretty well, but the empowerment that comes from having an app that you can just push a button on instead of doing this, and but seeing where the car is and not having to deal with payment, arguing with them about whether or not they should be taking credit cards or tips or any of that awkwardness. It's incredible, and that's for something that was fairly well served. But when you look at other things, whether it's food or lodging or any number of jobs that you want to have done, when people are busy working at startups, it's just unavoidable, both from the demand side but also from the supply side, because everybody wants more flexibility. Everybody wants to do something. They don't want to be limited to a certain role because of the time or the slots of time that they can allocate to that role. And apps And all of these platforms enable that to happen. And so you'll have this kind of fragmentation of the workforce into, into roles that will meet demand. And all of that will be enabled by apps and novel business models. And that's very exciting.
Yeah. Andrew?
Just very quickly, I mean, this is my sort of rhetorical question to rooms full of public servants. It's what is the Airbnb? What is the sort of disruptive business model that you can see approaching your own service area? And that, I think, is a sort of really important challenge to lay down to some of the sort of boroughs out there, because there are public policy problems that cross the boundaries that are sort of artificially imposed upon us, and there's an awful lot of disruption out there happening. So you know all about the sort of public sector spending cuts that continue to come in our direction. I think we need to be a whole lot more sort of innovative and broad in our thinking about how we approach what we do next.
Yeah, absolutely. So last question for John. So much of what makes city life worthwhile and attracts creative, talented people is to do with culture. And at Second Home, we really think that the old delineation between work and home, work and life, is really broken down. How do you see, what would you advise cities do in that area, and how would you prioritize sort of cultural life alongside the kind of innovation, technology policies that you've outlined in the report?
So there's a lame answer to this. Speaking personally, very highly, if you, from the heart, it's obviously one of the things that makes a city the compelling place to be. And actually, more dryly, if you just look at research about what brings people into cities, it's often things like the people that they meet, the quality of bars and restaurants, sort of culture like music and theatre and so on. So there's no doubt whatsoever that that's an incredibly important part of the overall mix of a city. And the more you can kind of mix that with kind of new ideas and new businesses, the better. They're the kind of new ideas and new businesses that could only live in cities for that reason, I think. I have to say that just sort of the lame thing is that from our perspective, we had to kind of draw the line somewhere, and we wanted to focus our analysis on things that cities have quite a lot of control over, just so that we could look them in the eye and say, you're doing this well, you're doing this less well, you should change. And things like the quality of culture, cities can control that, there's no question about it, but it's quite indirect. It's probably over the long term. And so we did leave it out to leave this slightly more kind of technocratic feel that we have.
Can I just add one thing to that?
Yeah.
I think that's a really important point, because for far too long, cities have hidden behind these things to make themselves feel good. We have great restaurants, we have a beautiful lake, we have culture, whatever that means. It's very hard to measure in a quantitative way. And so, sure, you'll find some league table where you come first or second and everybody's happy. The problem is that's not enough. And when you talked about this being a guidebook, the image in my mind was actually it is a guidebook, not just for policymakers, but for young people. Young people graduating from university actually could decide to live anywhere today. The ones who are talented and have that flexibility, and they will choose the city based on criteria that include these. Sure, culture will be important, the vibrancy of nightlife, how late our restaurants open and all that, but these other things are vital, because otherwise there's no jobs for them.
Yeah, it's very true. Quick show of hands. Put your hand up if you were born outside of London. Pretty good. Put your hand up if you were born outside of the UK. I mean, look at that. I mean, it's something like 70% of the companies at Second Home are global. We think about 80% of the people that work here are global as well. So, it's a microcosm, I guess, of the city as a whole, as is this room. So, thank you so much to Andrew, Neil, John. We have a second, I think, are we going to have a quick break for beer and whatnot? And we'll call you back for the second panel discussion, which is going to be chaired by Sally Davis from the Financial Times. So thank you all very much.